Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a wine from southern France. The wine in question is Moulin de Gassac Guilhem. It's the 2022 vintage of that. It's an IGP Pays de l'Hérault. So it's a wine from the Languedoc in southern France, produced by the Guibert family, who established, owned and run Mas de Daumas Gassac estate in Aniene. Now, I did a number of tastings on the Wine Searcher YouTube channel detailing the history of Mas de Daumas Gassac, so I won't retell the whole story here. Suffice it to say, Mas de Daumas Gassac is something of a standard bearer for southern French wines, unusually for the Languedoc. It's Cabernet Sauvignon based wine, produced on an exceptional site, the estate having been created by the late Aimé Guibert and his wife Véronique when they bought this property back in the 1970s. The first vintage was 1978. Following on with his success in establishing Mas de Daumas Gassac, Aimé Guibert started working with the members of the local co-operative at Villeveyrac to create the Moulin de Gassac range of accessible, approachable, everyday drinking wines that didn't need aging. So it was early in the 1990s that Aimé Guibert realised that there were some vineyards locally just to the south of where the Mas de Daumas Gassac estate is, in Villeveyrac, that had a really quite exceptional terroir. They were sitting in an amphitheatre in the hills, slightly closer to the Mediterranean than Aniene. The cooperative was struggling to sell its wines. There was a danger that the growers might accept some generous EU subsidies that were then available to grub up their vineyards. And Aimé Guibert felt that this would be a dreadful loss of this fantastic terroir. So instead, he set out creating a partnership with the cooperative and the growers concerned, working with them in their winery on the coast in the port town of Cité, to make and market their wines. It seems the brand that was created, the Moulin de Gassac range, played a decisive role in preventing the disappearance of this terroir. So what Moulin de Gassac amounts to is a selection of the wines from the best plots in this terroir, grown on these hillsides where evidently the sort of amphitheatre of hills faces the sea. The soils here comprise a clay limestone that has quite a high proportion of bauxite. Bauxite being rich in iron, and the soils are also dry and well drained. I've seen them referred to as arid. The effects of the terroir here, the cooling influences and the devigoration of the free draining soils ensure low yields result. The fruit can have a concentrated nature and reach full maturity while still retaining some freshness and elegance. Now, one of the long-term goals of the Guibert family with Mas de Daumas Gassac is repeated here with Moulin de Gassac, and that's the idea of respecting the environment and its biodiversity. The notes on the wine describe how this is done in a couple of ways. For instance, they detail two forms of pest control. Firstly, using techniques to disrupt insect mating by disrupting the hormonal system that insects and parasites use to reproduce. As a result, fewer eggs are produced, and there's a significant reduction in the number of larvae that can create any damage. Another form of control that's used here is the placing of bat boxes in the vineyards. Evidently, pipistrelle bats particularly will eat the moths that carry grape worm. By having the bat boxes there, it's possible to keep numbers of this worm down to a level that doesn't interfere with the viticulture. As far as soil management is concerned, they avoid using herbicides and they're encouraging biodiversity. They're doing this by using mechanical weed control, so ploughing, and also by grassing down between the vines. So these processes can significantly reduce the use of chemicals in the vineyard. All the 70 or so growers who supply the Guiberts for the Moulin de Gassac are certified by an organisation called Terra Vitis. That's an organisation certifying the sustainability of these vineyards. This certification has been in place since 2020. And the idea is to make viticulture sustainable in three ways. First of all, environmentally, secondly, socially, and thirdly, economically. So the aim is to give a preference to natural regulation methods in the vineyards, not necessarily to be organic, but certainly to favour organic approaches where possible. Another one of the aims is to strive to create a healthy environment for the producer, their employees, and their neighbours. The rules go on to state that they have to promote biodiversity in the locality, and there are aims to improve and preserve the quality of the locality's soil, air and water. 2020 was a pretty good vintage. It was quite dry during the winter. Spring warmed up fairly rapidly, although there was a cool slam, I believe, and with temperatures rising, both budburst and flowering were quite successful. May was abnormally hot, and then June brought some relieving rain, but generally the summer was marked by heat and drought. So while the vines suffered from the lack of water, they were at least free from disease problems. Fortunately, some humidity brought some relief to the vines, but clearly the warmth of the vintage was more conducive to the production of red wines than white wines. The quality of the fruit was high, and many of the wines from this vintage will age well. As far as vinification is concerned, Guibert's involvement clearly has gone on throughout the growing process, but working with the growers, they'll determine the date of picking to ensure the fruit has reached the optimum maturity level that they're looking for. So they select the plots and they decide when to harvest them. Vinification is pretty traditional. The fruit is entirely destemmed, it's crushed. Fermentation goes on in tank. I would assume that's stainless steel. I would imagine there's a certain amount of pumping over going on. Fermentation temperatures were allowed to rise between 25 to 30 degrees C, and I'm told that maceration lasted for 10 to 12 days. Also important as far as quality is concerned is the fact that all the different plots are vinified separately and then blended, and one of the aims is to try and make sure that the final blend, rather than being a consistent brand from year to year, actually reflects the nature of each terroir, but more importantly reflects the nature of the particular vintage. The wine ages for 5 to 6 months in stainless steel, so the notes I've seen don't suggest there's any oak influence on this wine whatsoever, and I think the point is to try and preserve the beautiful fruit perfumes into the final wine. The largest proportion of the blend is Syrah, which makes up 50%, which is combined with 30% of Grenache and 20% of Carignan. Now, I've seen blends for later vintages. I think the 2024 is simply a Syrah-dominated Syrah-Grenache blend. So I don't know if that's a long-term trend or if that was just be for that particular vintage that the change has been made. I think it's worth reiterating that while this is a cooperation between the Guibert family and the Villeveyrac co-operative, the Guiberts are there at every stage, supervising and monitoring the processes. So they're adding an external quality control element to the winemaking process. The notes from the producer suggest this is a wine that should be drunk within 3 years. So 2022 should, I guess, be at its optimum in mid-2025. So let's have a look at it and see what we make of it, shall we? First thing I'd say is this is a lovely, bright, ruby red. There's a slightly dark element to the ruby, but actually it's got very little depth of colour. I can see through it very readily, but its lovely bright nature is really quite attractive. The alcohol is listed on the label as being 13%. It's clinging to the glass and is slowly, quite reluctantly there, creating some tears, but it does suggest there's a little weight to the wine. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The nose is bright and fresh and perfumed. There's quite a compote of really quite sort of fresh, soft red fruits there. Slightly spicy raspberry. Notes are really quite ripe red plum, but ripe and fresh, not cooked or stewed. Perhaps even notes of cranberry, of red currant. Those sort of more high tone, more lifted red fruit styles. Again, quite a lively, vivacious set of aromas. So let's have a taste. The wine is dry, it's fresh. There's a little bit of structure. There's sort of a bitter, mouth-watering grip there, but it's not hugely tannic. They're quite fine, maybe slightly white pepper notes in the tannins. The fruit's lovely and juicy. It's carrying on all those aspects that I was getting from the nose there. You're sort of starting with a sort of that slightly spicy note of raspberries. There's a richer core of ripe but not overripe red plum. There's still quite a vibrancy to that. Then the more mouth-watering notes of cranberry and red currant. Sitting slightly above that, it seems, on the mid-palate, there is this sort of white pepper, a slight bite of very fine tannins. The wine is at best of mid-weight. This isn't a big, bruising heavyweight. Its acidity is good, it's giving it length, it's allowing those spicy notes to carry on over the perfumed red fruits on the finish. It's not a hugely complex wine. Although I'm describing different elements, it's actually quite harmoniously knit, and this juicy red fruit has some really quite nice length. Looking at the Wine Searcher aggregated critics score, this was a wine that scored 89 out of 100. I think this is a cleverly made wine that showcases some delicious fruit. It's certainly not for long aging, it's not structured enough for that, but it doesn't need to be, because it's bright, it's fresh, it's making my mouth water, it's appealing, and it's lovely to drink now. I'll leave a link in the notes to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, and that way you can see what its price is and whether it's available in your market. If you follow that, you'll be quite impressed by the value for money that this wine is offering. I think that a score of somewhere in the region of 89 to 90 reflects a really well-made example of well-made wine that's showing off some lovely pure fruit. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you found the tasting of interest. If you have, do please press the like button, that would be fantastic. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, do please subscribe to my YouTube channel, that would be very helpful. And that way also you can set yourself an alert and you can be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. And if you have any comments you'd like to make about this wine, about the wines of Mas de Daumas Gassac, other wines from the Languedoc, or anything else relating to this tasting, do please pop them in the comments box below. I would love to hear what you think about these wines. So thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time, come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.